My in-laws demanded I take care of their son like a traditional wife, so I taught them a lesson they'll never forget. When I married my husband, I thought I was gaining a second family, but instead, I gained a group of people who thought I was their son's maid. His mother, a good wife should cook for her husband every day. His father, it's your duty to make sure he never has to lift a finger. His sister, you should be grateful. He works hard. You should take care of everything else. At first, I thought they were just old-fashioned, that maybe this was just harmless tradition. But then my husband started expecting it too. Dishes, my job, laundry, my job, cleaning, cooking, running errands, all my job. And when I finally put my foot down, they called me lazy. They thought I'd just accept it. They thought I'd be a quiet, obedient wife. But if they thought they could turn me into their son's servant, they were in for a rude awakening. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. When I first married into his family, I thought I was gaining a second family who would support us and share in our joy. Instead, I quickly learned that my in-laws expected me to be nothing more than a traditional wife, a caretaker for their son, a domestic servant who would cook, clean, and run every errand without question. In the early days of our marriage, his mother would casually remark, "A good wife should cook for her husband every day," while his father insisted that it was my duty to make sure he never had to lift a finger. I tried to be polite, assuming it was just their old-fashioned way of doing things, but as time went on, their demands became relentless. Every family gathering, every dinner, every holiday meant that I was expected to handle everything, from preparing meals to cleaning up, leaving my husband to sit back and watch. At first, I endured it quietly, thinking I could adjust and maybe even win their approval by being the perfect wife. I sacrificed my own time, my career aspirations, and even my personal interests to cater to their endless expectations, believing that if I worked hard enough, they might come to see my value beyond the domestic role. But as the months turned into years, the situation worsened. My husband began to expect more from me, reinforcing the notion that our marriage was a contract in which I was merely there to serve his family's traditional ideals. I found myself exhausted, trapped in a role that robbed me of my identity and independence. The final straw came during one particularly tense family dinner, when his sister casually commented that I should be grateful for having a roof over my head while doing nothing more than cooking and cleaning. I realized then that they saw me not as a partner, but as a perpetual free employee, someone whose only purpose was to maintain the home, while they reaped the benefits of my labor. That evening, as I walked home alone after the dinner, my heart pounded with a mix of sorrow and simmering rage. I knew I could no longer allow myself to be diminished, and if my in-laws believed that by treating me like a servant they could control our lives, then they were about to learn that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And I was ready to fight for the dignity that had been stripped away. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. For too long, I had been the quiet, accommodating wife, swallowing my frustrations while my husband and his family walked all over me. But after his sister's comment about how I should be grateful for doing nothing but housework, I had reached my limit. I sat across from my husband at breakfast, watching as he scrolled through his phone, completely oblivious to my mood. "Hey," I said casually, "when was the last time you did laundry?" He barely looked up. "I don't know. You always do it," I smiled. "Exactly. But I won't be doing it anymore." That got his attention. He set his phone down. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair. "I mean, I'm done being your maid. From now on, we're splitting everything. Laundry, dishes, cleaning, cooking, everything." His brow furrowed. "Why are you making this a big deal?" I tilted my head. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe because I've been handling every single household task while you sit back and do nothing?" He scoffed. "That's not true. I do things too." "Like what?" I challenged. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and had nothing, because he knew I was right. "Look," he said, clearly trying to defuse the situation. "This is just how my family does things. My mom took care of everything, and my dad worked. It's normal." I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah? Well, this isn't the 1950s. I work too. So if you think I'm going to keep taking care of everything while you sit back, you've got another thing coming." I stood up, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, confused. I smiled. "To enjoy my day while you figure out how to wash your own clothes." And then I walked out. Because if he and his family thought I was just going to keep playing the role of the obedient wife, They were in for a rude awakening. I spent the day enjoying my freedom. For the first time in a long time, I didn't rush home to make dinner. I didn't stress about laundry piling up. I didn't feel guilty for taking time for myself. And when I finally walked through the door that evening, the house was a disaster. Dishes were piled up in the sink. Laundry baskets were overflowing. My husband sat on the couch, looking completely lost. I smirked. Rough day? He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Babe, this isn't funny. The house is a mess. I shrugged, kicking off my shoes. Looks like it. So, what are you making for dinner? His face twisted in disbelief. You're joking, right? I crossed my arms. Nope, I already ate. Figured you'd handle dinner since, we're splitting responsibilities now. He stared at me like I had just spoken a foreign language. This isn't how it works, he muttered. You can't just stop taking care of things. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, I can, and I have. He groaned, standing up. So what? You're just gonna let everything fall apart? I shrugged again. I don't know. Are you? That was the moment he realized. For the first time in his life, he was going to have to pull his own weight. And the best part? His family wasn't there to help him. He tried calling his mom that night, probably expecting sympathy. I overheard the conversation from the other room. She's refusing to cook and clean, he whined. She just left everything. His mom's response? She's your wife. This is what she's supposed to do. I burst out laughing. Because that was never going to happen again. If they thought I was going to be their son's personal housekeeper forever, they were about to learn the hard way that I wasn't playing their game anymore. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of clanking dishes and muttered cursing from the kitchen. I smirked to myself. Let him struggle. For years, I had handled everything while he sat back and enjoyed a perfectly run home. Now, he was finally realizing that all of those little tasks weren't so little after all. I walked into the kitchen to find a complete disaster. Burnt toast, half-cooked eggs, a sink full of dirty dishes, and my husband looking completely overwhelmed. Morning, I said cheerfully, grabbing myself a coffee. He turned to me, rubbing his face in frustration. I don't get it. How do you do this every day? I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, I don't know. Maybe because I never had a choice. He sighed, clearly starting to get it. Look, I get that you're mad, he said, but you're making this way harder than it needs to be. I set my mug down and crossed my arms. Am I? Or are you just finally realizing how much work I've been doing all this time? His silence told me everything. Then, his mother called. I watched as he picked up the phone, putting it on speaker. So, have you talked some sense into your wife yet? She asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. My husband sighed. Mom, I don't think... This is ridiculous, she interrupted. A wife is supposed to take care of her husband. What kind of woman refuses to cook for her family? I raised an eyebrow. The kind of woman who works just as much as her husband and refuses to be treated like a maid. Silence. His mother wasn't expecting me to answer. Excuse me, she snapped. I didn't hold back. Oh, don't act surprised. You raised your son to expect a housewife. Too bad for him, he married an equal, not a servant. You're being selfish, she hissed. Marriage is about sacrifice. I laughed. Yeah? Then why is it that I'm the only one who's been sacrificing? More silence. My husband? He looked completely trapped, because for the first time, he had to choose. His mother's expectations, or his wife's reality. And this time, I wasn't going to let him stay silent. So, what's it going to be? I asked, folding my arms. He swallowed hard, looking between me and his phone. Then, finally, he spoke. Mom, she's right, his mother gasped. What did you just say? She's right, he repeated, firmer this time. I've been taking her for granted. I smirked, watching his mother lose her mind. But I didn't care, because for the first time in our marriage, my husband was finally on my side. His mother lost it. You cannot be serious, she shrieked through the phone. You're just letting her manipulate you? I laughed, shaking my head. Oh, so now expecting fairness in a marriage is manipulation? My husband rubbed his temples, clearly overwhelmed. But for once, he didn't back down. Mom, listen, he said, his voice tight. You and Dad raised me to think that a wife should handle everything. But that's not how things work. I should have been helping all along. Her voice turned cold. That's disappointing to hear. I thought I raised a man who knew how to take care of his family. I crossed my arms, watching my husband squirm. This was his moment. He could either fold under his mother's guilt trip, or he could finally take responsibility. And then, He let out a slow breath and said something that made me almost forgive him. "You did, Mom. But my family includes my wife, and I won't let her be treated like a servant anymore." Boom. The silence on the other end of the phone was delicious. "Fine," his mother finally snapped, "but don't expect me to agree with this nonsense." "I don't need you to," he replied simply. And with that, he hung up. I stared at him, trying to figure out if this was real growth or just him trying to calm the storm. "Did you mean that?" I asked. He turned to me, looking exhausted. "Yeah, I did." I studied him for a long moment. "Good," I finally said, "because I meant what I said too. If you ever expect me to go back to the way things were, I won't." He nodded. For the first time, he really understood. And his mother? She had just realized something too. I wasn't the submissive little wife she thought I was. I had drawn the line, and if she ever tried to cross it again, she was in for a rude awakening. For the first time in my marriage, the balance shifted. My husband finally saw me as an equal, not a maid, not a caretaker, not a woman who was supposed to handle everything while he coasted through life. He stepped up. And his mother? She stewed. Days passed without a word from her. Then a week. Then 2. At first, I thought maybe she had given up. Maybe, just maybe, she had realized that her son wasn't under her thumb anymore. I should have known better. One Sunday afternoon, my husband and I were having a lazy day at home when his phone rang. His mom. He sighed, looking at me. "Do you want me to ignore it?" I smirked. "No, let's see what she has to say." He put the phone on speaker. "So," his mother started, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Are you two coming to dinner this weekend?" I stayed quiet, waiting. "We're busy," my husband said. "Why?" His mother sighed dramatically. "I just wanted to invite you both over. We haven't seen you in so long. I thought maybe we could have a nice family meal, just like old times." Oh, I bet she did. "Sure," I said suddenly, making my husband raise an eyebrow. His mother perked up instantly. "Wonderful. 6 o'clock then." I could hear the victory in her voice. She thought she had won. She thought I was coming back in line. But if she thought I was going to fall for this little trap, she was in for a shock. That Sunday, I walked into my mother-in-law's house with a plan. She thought she had won. She thought I had given up and was coming back to be the obedient, traditional wife she had always expected me to be. But if she thought I was about to roll over and go back to being her son's unpaid servant, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The dinner started like every other. Fake pleasantries, forced smiles, and thinly veiled passive-aggressive comments. "It's so nice to see you both," my mother-in-law gushed as she set down a steaming dish in front of us. "I made all of your favorites." Oh, I bet she did. She thought this was the grand reset, that this meal would be the beginning of me falling back in line. Then, she looked right at me. "Sweetheart, could you help me set the table?" Ah, there it was. I smiled sweetly. "Oh, I would, but I figured since I was invited as a guest, I'd just relax and enjoy the meal, like everyone else does when I'm the one cooking." Silence. Lisa, my husband's sister, choked on her drink. My father-in-law glanced between me and his wife, clearly not used to someone saying no to her. And my husband, he stayed silent, because he knew I was right. His mother blinked, clearly trying to process my response. "Well," she said slowly, "it's just that women in this family have always taken care of things in the kitchen." I let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, I know, and that's exactly why things are changing." She pursed her lips, barely holding back her annoyance. "It's just tradition," she said stiffly. I tilted my head. "Funny, I don't remember being consulted about these traditions before I married into the family." More silence. Then my husband did something that shocked everyone. "Mom, just let it go," he said, reaching for a plate. "She's right. She's not here to serve us." Boom. My mother-in-law's face twisted in shock, because for the first time, her son was standing up to her. She huffed but didn't argue. Instead, she turned on her heel and set the table herself. For the rest of the night, I watched as she forced herself to sit with the new reality. I wasn't her perfect little housewife. I wasn't going to serve them. And my husband, he wasn't going to enable her anymore. And if she thought this dinner was going to change that, she had just learned otherwise. Dinner continued, but the tension in the air was thick. For years, my mother-in-law had been queen of her domain. Everything ran according to her rules. Women served, men relaxed, and tradition was never questioned. But tonight, I had shattered all of that. She kept forcing a smile, but I could see the way she clenched her jaw every time I sat back and enjoyed my meal. Lisa, my husband's sister, was still trying to process what had just happened. She kept glancing between me and my husband, waiting for him to crack, waiting for him to tell me I was being difficult. But for once, he didn't, and that was the real win. At one point, my father-in-law cleared his throat and tried to change the subject. "So, work going well?" he asked my husband. "Yeah, things are good," he said. Then, he did something no one expected. He turned to me and added, "And her job is going great too. She's been busy, but she's killing it." I almost dropped my fork, because this was the first time he had ever acknowledged my career at the dinner table. And my mother-in-law, she did not like that. She snapped her napkin down and let out a sharp sigh. "It's just a shame," she said, forcing a frown. "So much work. I don't know how you have time for your marriage with everything on your plate." I smirked, setting my fork down. "Oh, it's easy when the responsibilities are split equally," I said sweetly. She gritted her teeth. Lisa let out a fake cough to hide her laugh. Even she had to admit I had her cornered. My husband? He just nodded. "Yeah, we've got a good balance now." And that was the final straw. She couldn't take it anymore. "Excuse me," she said stiffly, standing up and walking out of the dining room. I watched her go, shaking my head. She wasn't angry because I was wrong. She was angry because I had won. For the rest of the night, she was quiet. No more passive-aggressive comments. No more fake smiles. Because she knew. This was the new reality. She could either accept it or be left behind. And me? I wasn't looking back. After dinner, I expected my mother-in-law to pull my husband aside and try to undo everything. I expected her to play the guilt card, to remind him of his responsibilities as a husband, or to find some new way to manipulate the situation. But instead, she said nothing. She barely looked at me as we left. No passive-aggressive remarks, no fake sweetness. She was fuming. Because for the first time in her life, she had lost control. And my husband? He felt it too. As we drove home, I could tell he was deep in thought. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. His jaw was tense. "You okay?" I finally asked. He let out a slow breath. "Yeah, I didn't think she'd take it that hard," I snorted. "She's upset because she can't control you anymore. That's all this is." He hesitated before nodding. "It's weird," he admitted. "I always just went along with what she wanted. It never seemed like a big deal. But now, I see it." I tilted my head. "See what?" He sighed. "That she never wanted a daughter-in-law. She wanted another person to serve the family." I raised an eyebrow. "Took you long enough?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, I guess it did." For the first time, I felt hope. Because this wasn't just about me standing up for myself. It was about breaking the cycle. My husband had spent his entire life believing this was normal, that his mom's word was law, that tradition trumped fairness. But now, he was finally seeing through the illusion. "So, what now?" I asked, watching him closely. He shrugged. "We keep doing what we're doing. They'll either accept it or they won't. But I'm not going back." And that was all I needed to hear. Because for the first time in our marriage, we were finally a team. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. My mother-in-law, she stopped inviting us over as much, stopped checking in like she used to, stopped acting like she ran our marriage, because she finally realized she had lost control. At first, she tried to hold out hope that my husband would come to his senses, that eventually he'd wake up and see how wrong I was. But when she saw that he wasn't budging, she backed off, because she had no other choice. And me, I was finally free. No more being expected to serve while the men sat around. No more being told what a good wife should do. No more carrying the weight of an entire family's outdated traditions on my back. And my husband, he changed too. Not just in words, in actions. He started doing his share without being asked. Started cooking, cleaning, handling responsibilities. Started seeing me as an equal, not an obligation. One night, as we were making dinner together, he turned to me and said, "I get it now." I looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "Get what?" He sighed, shaking his head. "How much I let them take advantage of you. How much I let you carry on your own. I should have stood up for you sooner." I leaned against the counter, studying him. "And what would you have done if I hadn't put my foot down?" He hesitated before answering. "I don't know. I guess I would have just kept going along with it." And that was the truth. He had never thought about it before, because he never had to. But now he did. And now everything was different. Because I had drawn the line. Because I had refused to be treated like a maid. because I had made him see the reality of his family's entitlement. And now, things would never go back to the way they were. I smiled, reaching for the plate of food we had just made together. Good, I said simply. Because for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't standing alone. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, especially when family expectations are involved. But sometimes, drawing the line is the only way to change things. Have you ever had to fight back against unfair family expectations? How did it turn out? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.